Hello, everybody, and welcome back to week number 8 of the USFL. I'm going to be your host today, Sean, PSU Fans 2, Newsham. Joining me is my usual co-host, Alex, Fearmyturtle Hardin. Alex, how's it going today?
Doing pretty good. Didn't see much USFL last week, but catching up on what's going on. So interesting week ahead. So we'll jump into it.
Yeah, so Alex, you and I were talking yesterday a bit about why we don't love the league from a DFS perspective compared to that of like college football. Why don't you tell everyone like what you think kind of the issues are compared to basically the college football game and then also the NFL game? Like, what do you think the difference is between USFL and that from a DFS perspective?
Yeah, we're kind of just talking about like a lot of these teams are just kind of like college teams that we would just flat out ignore in terms of they rotate a lot of unpredictability in terms of usage and role, and a lot of poor coaching. So it just makes it tough to feel good each week. Obviously, if you're playing like the larger field tournaments and you want to take like a game theory heavy approach to it, I think it's probably pretty good for that, because like there's guys that get way overplayed and are easy fades from those perspectives. But if you're someone who makes one lineup or has like a cash heavy approach, it's not the easiest kind of league to work yourself way through, just because there's really like not one standout guy that's produced every week that you can rely upon. And then when you combine that without like the dynamic price, the prices haven't moved, and it makes it just pretty kind of stale each week. So it makes it tough because, yeah, all those factors combine into something that it makes it difficult to feel great about a single lineup each week. But everyone's playing the same game, so
no complaints. And to be fair, that makes it a good GPP sport because there's not really any stone cold smash plays that are going to be out there. So from a GPP perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, there's no people you hang your hat on. Like there's no stud running back that you're like, this guy's going to get 30 carries. Doesn't matter. He's touching the ball 30 times in one way or another. Like he'll be involved. It's really not like that, which obviously for Alex and I, when we are more cash game centric players and we like finding those type of plays and then pairing off of those plays, it makes it difficult from that perspective. But GPP wise, it's great because realistically speaking, there's been no real consistent receivers, no real consistent running backs. Quarterback has been somewhat consistent. It's more so there's been the good quarterbacks versus the guys that you just wouldn't play anyways. So quarterback's been somewhat relatively consistent, but when you go to the running back and receiver spot, it's all over the place, every team. We'll talk about it a little bit more once we get to the receivers and the running back positions individually with those players. So
yeah, I mean, even like the from the tournament approach, there's the biggest tournament this week is 35K GPP, 3,400 entries. So like even then, like it's a lot of time and effort to make those tournament lineups for such a small tournament relative to other sports. So it's kind of how we expected the season go in terms of contest size kind of decreasing. So be interesting to see when XFL comes next year earlier in the calendar, if it can kind of pick up some of that NFL season ending steam and like maybe maintain a bit higher contest. So that'll be interesting to see next year.
For sure. All right, so we'll start here with the quarterbacks. Do a quick run through the quarterbacks. So you guys will see there are a lot of teams that have multiple quarterbacks, which makes things difficult. Pittsburgh badly rotated with Roland Rivers last week a bit, which really knocked down badly. Kyle Sloter's been losing time to Zach Smith, which is shocking because Zach Smith is awful. So that's something that's different. We're expecting Deandre Johnson and Luis Perez to be back to their normal split as well this week. And then Jamar Smith, we think will play 100% of the quarterback snaps, but Alex Magoo was playing receiver last week. And it's also possible that Magoo maybe gets some quarterback snaps as well. And then Kenji Bahar is now the quarterback for Houston. We saw him. He has rushing ability, but he didn't really run last week. So it'll be interesting to see if possibly he can get more going with his legs this week. But yeah, so when you look at this, you see half of the teams do not have a clear-cut quarterback, which makes it very difficult. So what's your thoughts on the quarterback situation overall, Alex?
Yeah, and even someone like Josh Love, who are projecting for 100% of the snaps, that there's a lot of uncertainty there too, because like Paxton Lynch is getting healthier, like that could turn into a split, or Love could have a bad series or two and get pulled. There's really only two quarterbacks that I feel good about getting 100% of the snaps, and it's Tamu and Cookus at top. So those are going to be like the two cash game consideration quarterbacks for me, pretty clearly. And Cookus comes at a 2K discount, so that looks pretty nice. So he'd be my preferred play from a cash perspective. But someone like Kenji Bahar is pretty interesting for tournaments. Like you could do a single stack with him and kind of hope on. He has some rush upside as well. These fringe quarterbacks are really tough to double stack, especially with the rotation that's going on in these wide receiver rooms. So, but in terms of quarterback, Tamu and Cookus are our main two. And then Jamar Smith, that would be a pretty good tournament option for me. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like realistically, for cash games, we could probably just play a recording of us every single week, right? Like, I don't think we've said anyone but the Phillies starting quarterback. And as of more recently, Tuamu, like it's literally been those two every single week. I guess the question I have is like, does Tuamu's, with the fact that Philly's been leaning more so on the run than they previously have done, does that lean you more towards Tuamu as the top end quarterback?
It's somewhat of a concern, but probably no, just because of the 2K difference. And Tamu, like even if some games he's gotten like a 30% rush share and hasn't cracked like 12 or 13 DK points. So it's not like Tamu has this massive floor. I will say, like, I do believe Tamu has a better ceiling than Cookus, for talking about that. So if it might be a situation where if I'm comfortable with other spots on my roster, I could see myself upgrading Cookus to Tamu and cash games, but I'll start the build with Cookus and kind of move from there.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. Like, I think it's those two. And then the only other quarterbacks I think are realistic options to me are Jamar Smith, Josh Love, and Kenji Bahar. I like Kenji Bahar from GPP. We've seen him have running ability in the past. So we do know he can at least run if he wants to. So maybe last week they just held him back a little bit because they didn't have another alternative. So it could be a situation where they were trying to protect him last week, and this week they will let him be a little bit more free from that perspective. What's your thoughts on Bahar, since he's more of a new name within the rest of these guys that we've talked about a lot?
Yeah, I mean, my only concern with anything with this league is it's not always what it's rarely actually plays out how we think it will in a situation that seems straightforward. Like they could sign some random quarterback this week and end up playing him. But I think they probably will give Bahar a look, and he's a solid tournament option, especially at 6'1". Like you can pretty much do whatever you want elsewhere. And the only other last quarterback point is that we expect Deandre Johnson back for New Jersey, and they're favored by like 9 points against Pittsburgh. I could see that be a game where they kind of rely on the running backs and don't push Deandre Johnson, who's returning from a leg injury, too hard on the ground. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there.
For sure. All right, moving over to running backs. We'll go a little team by team type thing here. Emmons in Washington, very split. BJ Emmons, though, has been really poor all season. Similar when you go down to the running back situation for Pittsburgh, it's going to be mostly Groshek and Mondre London. Alex was actually messaging me the other day about how bad Garrett Groshek's been. He's just very unproductive and just not really going to get the job done. If you go to Philly, Matt Colburn has really established himself recently as the lead back. The last two games, he's gotten a really heavy workload, including last week where he had 21 carries and 7 targets. He had 100 yards on the ground, or I think he had like 75 yards on the ground, actually. He was not super productive with his carries, which you would expect due to his lack of talent, but he's been productive. Anthony Jones and Ellis remain in a pretty even split along the same lines as Trey Williams and Darius Victor. Alex thinks the Reggie Corbin's been the best running back in the league, but it's a three-way split. It's very even between the three, and Corbin's limited to like 40 to 50% of the snaps, which I'll let Alex talk about when we go to when I hand it off to him here. And then Mark Thompson has been established. He's very clearly the top running back for Houston, but he's not getting the workload. So he's the guy that's playing the most of probably all the running backs, but he's not really necessarily getting the workload. And then down to Birmingham, which is probably another contention point. Bo Scarborough absolutely got fed last week. He had 27 carries for Birmingham, but CJ Maribel was just coming back off an injury. So we'll start with Reggie Corbin, Alex. So I know before we started here, you talked about how you think he's the most talented running back and has been the best running back in the league from like a looks standpoint. So why don't you talk a little bit about Corbin and the situation there for Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, he's someone we liked coming into the season in terms of someone who actually has some juice that can break away, and his talent should play in this league, and it kind of has. The issue is just like the team and how they've been rotating running backs so heavily and not giving Corbin kind of the usage that he deserves. So it makes it tough to play him because, like, yeah, last week he had 42% of the snaps, Stevie Scott 36, Scarlett 22. And no targets for Corbin either. So it makes it kind of tough. But we know this Philly rush defense, not good, probably the worst in the league, even though they have regressed a bit to the mean the last few weeks. But a situation where Corbin could break off a couple of long runs here, definitely wouldn't be surprised. So he's someone I'm definitely interested in, only 6,300. Colburn is solid as well. I think I like the running backs a lot better this week than receivers at first look. And you mentioned before some of the more disappointing people. I think Garrett Groshek and BJ Emmons are the two most disappointing running backs in the league so far for me. I thought they'd both actually be pretty productive in this league, and that has not turned out to be the case. They're struggling to get 3 yards a carry, and just have not been good kind of fantasy assets for us. So beyond that, Scarborough, definitely I have some concern with Maribel coming back, but it seems like Scarborough is going to get fed. Like, he's a guy that they brought in to like just move the pile, and he's been doing that. So I think you can feel pretty good about that play. Darius Victor is probably my favorite running back at his price. New Jersey's going to dominate Pittsburgh most likely. I'm not too interested in Deandre Johnson or Luis Perez. I think they'll be playing from ahead, so it'll be a lot of runs. Victor's probably going to get fed here. He has goal line. Trey Williams is an interesting tournament pivot because he's a bit more expensive. He has more of a pass game role generally, but he's viable as well. This New Jersey running backs feel pretty good about one of them having a good game here.
Yeah, for sure. Looking back at Bo Scarborough, how much do you think the return of CJ Maribel will affect him?
I mean, it's tough. Let's see. Maribel only played 16% of the snaps last week, which was the same as Tony Brooks-James. So to me, that looks like a ramp-up thing, because I know they don't like Tony Brooks-James. So it could be a situation where Maribel just eats into any of the Tony Brooks-James snaps, and Bo Scarborough maintains his heavy snap role. I still feel good about Scarborough getting 17 to 20 carries, I think, even if they are ramping up Maribel.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well. Corbin scares me a little bit more than he scares you. For running backs especially, it's difficult to produce when you're not getting volume. Which is always very hard because you're not breaking away for like 60-yard touchdowns, which receivers can do more frequently than running backs. So Corbin scares me for that reason. The person I guess we got to talk about, I think the biggest cash game lock probably is Matt Colburn. His usage the last 2 weeks has just been absurd, and it's impossible realistically for him to fail when he gets 21 carries and he gets 7 targets in the air. So would you agree that he's probably the most cash game viable option out there?
Yeah, unless Paul Terry's active, and that obviously would throw a wrench in things. But and then the fact Colburn is such a solid play, it makes me even more inclined to move to Tamu at quarterback if I can have that 2K for your main lineup. But yeah, Colburn's role has been really good. I just keep an eye on Paul Terry's status.
For sure. The rest of the running backs, like I think the other name that I would mention as one of the biggest failures thus far this season would be Stevie Scott. He's been pretty much useless all season. So I would probably put him in with the other group as well. All right, moving over to the receivers. So receiver, as you see, there's very few people projected over 10 points. It's been very murky. We have people that just aren't getting targets, and they're getting targets. The one guy that stands out to me is Kevontae Turpin. We talked about last week with me and Jamino that he is getting involved. No matter what, they are game planning for him. So he's like the one receiver that is active in the offense no matter what. So why don't you talk a little bit through receivers here? Because to me, it's just a bunch of mediocre guys that are not great options outside of Turpin. And even Turpin, despite me saying that Turpin is the best option, I don't think he's like amazing. He's not like the best play of all time. It's just he stands out of a bunch of turds.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, Turpin only 64% of the snaps last week, but when he's in, they're going to get him the ball. He had 4 carries and 4 targets. You would hope a little bit more than that, but in this league, that's been okay. He's pretty talented though. But yeah, it's rough. It's probably, if I'm making a cash game team this week, it's probably a 3 running back week for sure. And then we have a situation like Victor Bolden, who I believe got hurt last week after catching like a 50-yard pass. So we need more information on him if he's playing. If he's out, would feel pretty good about Osiris Mitchell's role, and also we need news on Marlon Williams if he's going to be back for Birmingham. Philly wide receivers, there's a bunch of those at the top. They're not rotating too much, but they have been relying more on their ground game recently. So it's tough when you have like 4 receivers to fend for like 25, 30 targets. It's tough to peg that down. But someone like Jordan Sewell finally had a big game after kind of disappointing for the first half of the season. And it's just kind of taking shots on guys. Really, you're in a cash game approach, probably looking at it more and more is just pick the quarterback and running backs you want and just like kind of make wide receiver work. I don't think there's a lot like fading Turpin's fine. I think like he's not somebody you have to play.
No, I mean, realistically speaking, I mean, if we can go through here real quick and we can sort of lock in some guys. So if we're saying we want to play Tomu, and then you're looking at running back and you want to play Colburn, Victor, Scarborough, and then you want to play Turpin, you still have plenty to make it work, right? So it's like one of those things, like you literally have a free roll to do whatever you want at receiver. Now, whether you play like Bug Howard, whether you play Alonzo Moore, Isaiah Henny, like any of these guys realistically can work within the confines of your lineup. So like I think that there's a pretty easy path to do whatever you want due to the price points and what they have everyone priced at currently. So I don't think it's going to be tons of a concern from that perspective. But yeah, I mean, looking at it, like you have Turpin and then you have a bunch of people that are huge question marks to me. Now, if Victor Bolden is out, Alex, how do you think that impacts Birmingham?
I mean, it also depends if Marlon's out. So if like someone like if Mitchell, I mean, if Bolden and Marlon are out, like we assume this like the second half of last week was, maybe we see Magoo play wide receiver still. You get like Michael Darius and Osiris Mitchell rotating in. Like at that, I didn't catch much of the game, so I'm not sure how Magoo looked at wide receiver, but I'm assuming him out there wide receiver that can shade more coverage towards someone like a Mitchell to not get beat deep by him. So I think Bolden being healthy is pretty important for their pass game overall. They are a 3-point favorite against New Orleans, so kind of it should be a pretty close game. But losing Bolden would hurt pretty bad for that offense, I think.
For sure, yeah. And looking through, like all the expensive receivers are very not exciting. I would use, but like someone I still like for GPPs, like I've talked about, is Isaiah Zuber. No one's going to play him. Like he's just not going to be played at his price point. And this is a guy that catches touchdowns on occasion. He has 4 touchdowns on the year. Most of them were relatively long touchdowns as well. Is he going to go out there and put up a stinker? Very likely. But he does have the possibility to catch like 4 for 120 and 2. And if he does something like that, like that's going to break the slate. So from a GPP perspective, I like that. Overall, I think that it's really, for me, Turpin and then someone. Obviously in GPPs though, like we're talking about, like this group that we have over here, like Tomu, Colburn, Turpin, Victor, Scarborough, we expect that to be pretty heavily owned. So you're going to need to be switching up some of that. At least at the running back, I would not really play more than 2 of these in the same lineup in GPP. Would you agree with that, Alex?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty heavy ownership week for running backs in general. So be kind of cognizant of how you play them. Like just looking at this lineup you have up now, like you could plug in someone like a Derek Dillon, who's effectively the number 1 receiver for Tampa Bay. You get that connection with Tomu, and then like you have plenty for you can play most of the defenses in that lineup.
Exactly. But yeah, like receiver, I don't think any receiver is going to be absurdly high owned. Like Turpin will probably be the highest owned. do you see any receiver like garnering more than like 20% ownership?
I think if Bolden is out, I think Turpin certainly will get above 20%. Outside of that, I think it'll be pretty spread. Yeah, there's really not much doubt. Like, these are all guys that you're just kind of taking shots on, like Jordan Sewell or Alonzo Moore is somebody that's pretty interesting to me for tournaments. He's been kind of racking up a bunch of air yards this year.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that Sewell definitely is someone that makes sense to me. Like, he's someone that he sort of fits the mold with what I just talked about with Zuber, just on a more interesting team. But like, he's not been productive thus far this year. However, last week he caught 7 for 72 and a touchdown. So he had 20 points last week. And a lot of the games, so he has a lot of zeros and a lot of duds. Like, he has 3 games 3.1 or under thus far. So like, you definitely are not going to get consistency there. However, again, if you're running wind sprints down the sidelines, you're active to catch bombs, which is generally how you win in a GPP situation, especially when there's not a bunch of consistent guys that are getting targets and getting volume. So, all right, moving on to the defense. My opinion on defense remains the same. You want to spread it out. Try to avoid some of the more chalky defenses and maybe go more so with some of the other options instead. Has anything changed from a defensive thought process for you?
No, but I actually think defense might be a bit spread out in terms of ownership this week anyway. So it probably won't be one of those weeks where like there's a clear cut like 30% defense in the main tournament. I think we'll get a bit more spread. Like, Birmingham's in a good spot. Philly's playable. New Jersey's in a good spot. Tampa Bay's in a good spot. So like, I think it'll mostly be spread among the 4 favorites fairly evenly. I guess just due to the spread, New Jersey might get a bit pushed up, but they're not even our top ranking defense. That goes to Birmingham, based on like their sack rate and kind of how things play in that game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just a situation where one of the defenses probably is going to score a touchdown. That defense is probably going to be needed to realistically have an optimal or a high-end lineup. Although I guess with the smaller GPPs, it means being optimal isn't as necessary. You just need a really good lineup. So it could be a situation where you get away with not having the top-end defense.
So what are your thoughts on playing a defense versus a quarterback you play in GPP in a league like this where there's only 4 games? Are you avoiding playing quarterback versus opposing defense?
No, I think it's fine. I mean, even in the NFL, like we talk about in other things, throwing a pick 6 is awesome for both the defense and the quarterback. Like, if you throw a pick 6, it's huge because it puts you behind, and it obviously you threw a touchdown. So if you're playing from behind, you're continuing to throw, and they're continuing to get points. So I don't think it's bad at all. I think it's a realistic option, not even just here, but also in the NFL. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent. Just it depends on the slate size, really, for me. These are 4 games, so it's certainly more viable. When you get to playing like a 10-game slate, I think that's less of a chance. It's something I look to avoid more. But to your point, certainly, and probably lower level football is different, especially like if we had defenses in college, like, yeah, that definitely would be viable, just because, I mean, the one thing I'm worried about in this league is just getting benched from throwing an interception, because it's kind of like the quarterback carousel on most teams. But
correct. It's very, very confusing.
Fair point.
From that perspective. Agreed. All right. That's going to wrap it up for us today. Alex, is there anything else that you think we missed today that you want to discuss?
No, I think we hit it all. We'll get ownership up a bit later today, finalize tags, and it's a Friday kickoff, so a little earlier than the last couple of weeks. So we'll be ready.
Yep, and for those wondering, we are recording this Thursday around lunchtime. So if you see news that comes out after that, know that this was recorded before that happened. So make sure you're cognizant of that. All right, everyone. For Alex, I am Sean. Good luck this week. We will see you guys back here next week.